media has already chosen their king. They always do. They want you to worship the natural geniuses, the golden boys born with magic in their feet. But true greatness isn't a gift from God. It's a violent, obsessive war against human limits. And in this World Cup, only one 41-year-old man is fighting that war. Let's be honest about something. You already know who the media wants you to crown. You've seen the documentaries, the magazine covers, the carefully curated highlight reels set to orchestral music. The narrative has been written for years, maybe decades. The chosen one, the artist, the natural-born genius whose talent was so pure, so effortless, it felt less like sport and more like religion. And you were supposed to accept it. Most people did. But here's what nobody in that media machine wants to say out loud. The system doesn't just prefer natural genius, it needs it. Because natural genius is a story you can sell without complication. It's beautiful, it's romantic. It requires no explanation and no accountability. You don't have to ask how. You just have to watch and feel something. Obsession? Hard work? A man who treats his body like a military weapon and his career like a decades-long war? That story is uncomfortable. It doesn't fit the poster. It doesn't make the algorithm sing. Because if the obsessive worker can achieve what the natural genius achieves, then the genius wasn't so magical after all. And that ruins everything. This video is about the other story. The one the establishment doesn't want trending. The one that doesn't end at 33 or 35 or 37, when every pundit on earth lined up to write the obituary. The story of a man who looked at human biology, at media consensus, at the ticking clock of a career that by every measurable standard should be over, and said no. He is 41 years old. He is at the 2026 World Cup. He is still here. And that alone, before we talk about a single goal, a single match, a single statistic, is the most remarkable athletic statement this tournament has produced. Here is what Portugal's group stage has looked like so far. June 17th, Portugal versus Congo DR. A stumble, a draw, 1-1. The narrative machines spun up instantly. He's done, the team is limited, they won't go far. June 23rd, Portugal versus Uzbekistan. 5-0, 5 goals, a demolition. Clinical, ruthless, total. The kind of result that doesn't just win a game, it sends a message to everyone who spent 6 days sharpening their takes. That swing, from a draw that sparked doubt to a destruction that silenced it, is not a football story. It is a psychological story, and it is the story of a squad built in the image of its leader. Think about what it takes to be 41 years old and still the emotional center of a World Cup squad. Not a ceremonial captain, not a legacy pick handed a retirement tour. The actual heartbeat, the standard. The person whose preparation sets the temperature for everyone around him in training, in the hotel, in the locker room at 6 a.m. when nobody is watching and nothing is glamorous. His teammates are 10, 12, sometimes 15 years younger than him. They grew up watching him. And now they are watching him still, not as a museum piece, but as the benchmark. That is not normal. That is not what aging looks like in professional football. That is what happens when a man decides, somewhere deep in his architecture, that stopping is simply not an available option. The media's preferred narrative needed him to be finished. It was tidier that way. The golden genius's story was complete. The arc had its ending. All that remained was for the other one to gracefully exit, to acknowledge, finally, that the verdict was in and the hierarchy was settled. He didn't do that. Instead, he came to the United States, to Canada, to Mexico, to the largest World Cup in history. At 41 years old, in the summer of 2026, and he opened the tournament with a message that required no translation. "You wanted me gone. I'm still here." Let's talk about the story the establishment loves. It goes like this. Somewhere, once in a generation, a child is born with something the rest of humanity doesn't have. Some divine inheritance. Some genetic accident so rare and so beautiful that it borders on the supernatural. The game comes to them like breathing, like memory, like something that was always already there. The camera loves this story. The sponsors love this story. The media ecosystem built around professional football loves this story more than any other, because it requires nothing from the audience except surrender. You don't have to understand it. You just have to witness it and worship. But here's the part of the story they edit out. The natural genius narrative doesn't just celebrate a type of talent. It punishes everything else. When a player is described as a hard worker, it is never a compliment. Not really. It is a polite way of saying, "We see what you're doing and we respect it, but we both know you weren't chosen." The subtext is always there. You can feel it in the commentary, in the awards, in which highlight packages get set to piano music and which ones get buried. The system has a hierarchy, and it placed obsession below gift a long time ago. Why? Because the obsessive worker is a dangerous story. If a man can manufacture greatness through sheer, violent, relentless will, then the genius was never a miracle. He was just a head start. And head starts can be closed. That possibility terrifies a narrative built entirely on inevitability. So the system protects itself. It calls the obsessive worker cold, robotic, vain. It frames his hunger as ego and his standards as arrogance. It makes his greatest qualities sound like character flaws. And for 25 years, the number 7 has carried every one of those labels. Here is what they called arrogance. A man who decided at some point in his adolescence that second place was a form of failure he was constitutionally incapable of accepting. Who built a lifestyle not around pleasure or comfort, but around performance, around the single-minded elimination of every variable that stood between him and the ceiling of human physical possibility. That is not arrogance. That is armor. Every gladiator who ever walked into an arena understood something the crowd never did. You cannot perform in the Colosseum if you spend your energy worrying about what the crowd thinks of you. The armor isn't vanity. The armor is survival. The armor is what lets you walk back out onto the pitch at 41 years old in front of 1 billion people and still believe, with no irony and no hesitation, that you are the best option available. Remove the armor and you don't get humility. You get paralysis. The Golden Boys never needed armor. The world was already on their side. The cameras were already pointed at them. The narrative was already written in their favor. He had to build his own shelter, out of discipline and defiance, brick by brick, for 2.5 decades. And he's still living in it. Now let's talk about the body, because this is where the story stops being philosophical and starts being almost medically impossible. The human body at 41 is in biological retreat. This is not opinion. This is cellular fact. VO2 max, the measurement of how efficiently the body uses oxygen under maximum physical load, declines at roughly 1% per year after the age of 30. Muscle fiber composition shifts. Fast twitch fibers, the ones responsible for explosive acceleration and sharp directional changes, begin converting to slower variants that cannot be fully reversed through training alone. The sport of professional football at World Cup level demands peak output in all of these areas simultaneously. No outfield player should be here at 41, and yet, his documented physical data from the last 3 years reads like a physiological argument against the passage of time. body fat maintained at levels typical of athletes 15 years his junior. Sprint speed metrics that would embarrass players born when he was already winning his first league titles. A recovery protocol so precise and so obsessive that sports scientists have published papers trying to reverse engineer it. This did not happen because he was gifted a body. He built this body, rebuilt it repeatedly over decades. Each time the biology tried to reclaim what was borrowed, he renegotiated the terms, paid the difference in sleep cycles and ice baths, and meals he didn't want, and mornings that started before the sun had the decency to show up. The Golden Boys played the game they were born to play. He rebuilt himself from the inside out, over and over, to keep playing a game his body kept trying to retire him from. That is not the same thing. It has never been the same thing. And then there is the weight that cannot be measured in any lab. Portugal, a nation of 10 million people, a footballing culture that has spent decades searching for its moment, and found, in one man, something that felt like destiny. He didn't just become their best player, he became their proof. Proof that a boy from a small island off the Atlantic coast, from a family that had nothing, could stand at the summit of the world's most watched sport and refuse to come down. That is not a sports story. That is a national identity compressed into one set of shoulders. And he carries it the way he carries everything else, without complaint, without performance, without the theatrical displays of burden that lesser men use to remind the world how much they sacrifice. He carries it quietly, alone, in hotel rooms at 2 a.m. before knockout games, in training sessions where his standards terrify teammates half his age, in the space between the final whistle and the next challenge, where most players rest and he prepares. The isolation at that level is total. You cannot explain it to anyone who hasn't lived it. The people who love you cannot reach you there. The teammates who respect you cannot follow you in. It is the loneliness of a man who set a standard so high that no one around him fully inhabits the same altitude. Some men break under that weight. He built a throne out of it. Let's be clear about something before we land this. This video is not asking you to stop admiring the artists, the natural geniuses, the ones who made the game look like poetry, who moved through defenses like light through glass, who made billions of people fall in love with football simply by existing on a pitch. They deserve everything they have been given. The admiration, the reverence, the magazine covers and the museum retrospectives, and the children who grew up trying to move the way they moved. Admire them. You should. They earned it. But admiration and respect are not the same thing. Admiration is what you feel in the moment. It is the sharp intake of breath when something beautiful happens. It is involuntary, effortless. It costs you nothing and asks nothing in return. Respect is different. Respect is what you give to something that made you uncomfortable, something that refused to be convenient, something that kept showing up long after you decided it was finished, and forced you to revise everything you thought you understood about what human beings are capable of. One man at this World Cup earns your admiration and your respect. The others earn one or the other. That is the distinction. That is the entire argument. That is what separates the number 7 at 41 years old at the largest World Cup in human history from every other conversation this tournament is trying to have. Here is the philosophy this entire video has been building toward. Talent is a starting point, nothing more. It is the hand you are dealt before the game begins. And some people are dealt extraordinary hands, and the world never lets them forget how lucky they are. But the game is long. The game is brutal. The game will take everything you have and come back for the things you didn't know you were holding. And at some point, for every player in every era, without exception, The game will try to take the one thing that talent cannot replace: the will to keep going. Most let it go, gracefully even. There is dignity in knowing when the chapter is over. The world respects that too, in its own way. And then there is the number 7, who looked at the end of the chapter and picked up a pen,
who looked at biology and called it a negotiation, who looked at a media system that had already written him out of the story and showed up anyway, at 41, at a World Cup in the summer of 2026, and quietly, without drama, without a speech, without needing anyone's permission, kept going. That is the philosophy. You can inherit a gift. You cannot inherit that. If this is the kind of argument that gets your blood moving, the kind of video that makes you think, makes you disagree, makes you want to fire something back, then you already know this channel is where you belong. Hit subscribe, because the next argument is already being built. And before you go, so I have to ask you, does being born a genius make you the GOAT? Or does bleeding for 20 years to conquer the world make you the true king? Tell me I am wrong in the comments.